All right. We better get going. I got a lot to say today. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to have to go fast. I've got 3.5 pages of typed notes to go through. It's going to be on the back table if you'd like to check out the DVD. Let's see. Oh, Michelle, how did you watch the DVD?
I did not, because Rod left to go to Riverton, and he wanted to watch it too. So we're waiting until Tuesday.
Okay, so you don't know how to run. No, I'm sorry. You have. That's not what it is. Okay. No, I know. I'm just kidding around. So you see, here I am wasting time already. I'll turn this thing on. So this is, see if we can get this one going here. Yeah? Yeah, it's on. There you go. Oh, look, see, I changed fonts. And this one works with that computer. I just wanted something that looked Egyptian, kind of. I don't know. I couldn't find anything any better than that. Solving the Exodus mystery. And so we are now, let me change this again. This one doesn't seem to go. I may have to just tell Troy to change it every time. I'll tell you what it's going to say. There we go. But anyway, it's better to see it for yourself. Here we go. Part 3, Joseph and the 12th Egyptian dynasty. The thing you've been waiting for, you've been hanging out for. So in our first lesson, we examined what is the problem that makes the Exodus mystery a mystery. And so, not changing again. Here we go. The problem is that a vast majority of modern archaeologists reject the biblical stories of Abraham through the Exodus and say that it is a myth. We just can't find it. It just didn't happen, they say. They have not been able to synchronize. This is going to be a long day. I have a lot of changes on this thing. There you go. That's important to get that line on there. So they have not been able to synchronize any part of Egyptian history with corresponding biblical history, at least not the dates. They couldn't get those dates together. So in our second lesson, we noted the biblical timetable that was established by Ted Stewart. And we talked about how important it is for the length of time that the Israelites were in Egypt to be 210 years. And that was substantiated by the Bible and by Far Eastern dates, brought everything into alignment then in the eastern part of the world anyway. But instead of 430 years, they just couldn't find this 430 years of all these Canaanites, especially Hebrew Canaanites, who are in Egypt with all this stuff happening that is described. But 210 years, as the Bible really says that it is, then that makes a big difference. So today, we want to review the biblical account of Joseph and begin to examine the 12th dynasty of Egyptian history. So, today, the portion of Joseph's story that we're going to look at is from Genesis 37 through Genesis 41. And I would love to just read portions of it. We'll read some of it. I'd like to read a lot more, but we just don't have time if we're going to stay on schedule. But it's a pretty familiar story with you. Remember what happens is that Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons. And he gave Joseph a special garment to wear. He gave him special responsibilities. And then you add to that the fact that Joseph started having these dreams, which indicated that his family was going to be bowing down to him someday. And it made his brothers really jealous. And so they sold Joseph into Egyptian slavery. There was a caravan coming through, and Joseph was sold to them. They took him off down into Egypt. He was sold into the slave market in Egypt. He eventually ended up in the house of Potiphar. It says in chapter 39, verse 1, that Potiphar was Pharaoh's bodyguard, part of the secret service. You know, sometimes we've talked about Potiphar as being like, you know, he was in charge of the prison or something. But he was the bodyguard. He was in charge of the bodyguard, the secret service of Pharaoh's household. And so he is sold to the household of Potiphar. He rises to be a very trusted person by Potiphar, not Pharaoh, but Potiphar. And so he is in charge of all the other household servants. He's doing very well. He's a person who is a hard worker. He has got a good work ethic, and God is with him. And everything's going well until Potiphar's wife begins to make accusations against him. And then in chapter 39:19, he is cast into prison. And he stays in prison for a good while until one day there are two court officials who are imprisoned along with him. Remember how this story goes. One of them was the chief cupbearer. Some versions say butler. It was the cupbearer, a very trusted person by Pharaoh. Another was his baker. You have to pretty much trust that too. These are people that are bringing stuff in that you eat and drink, and that's how they bumped off people most of the time back then if they wanted to get rid of a Pharaoh or something. And so these guys are thrown into prison. Doesn't say why, but they were there for some time. And finally, one night, they both have a dream. The cupbearer dreams that there's a vine with grapes, and the grapes are squeezed into a cup, and he offers the cup to Pharaoh. The other guy, the baker, he dreams that he's got 3 baskets of bread that are on his head, and some birds come and they eat them all up. And they said, you know, boy, this really got us bummed. I mean, what does this mean? And then Joseph said, well, I'll tell you what it means. It means that you, the cupbearer, in 3 days are going to be restored back to your position. And you, the baker, in 3 days, you're going to be hung. And your body's going to be left hanging as a message to everybody not to do whatever it is that you did. And the birds are going to come and eat your flesh. And so in 3 days, the cupbearer is restored. The baker is hung, just like Joseph said. And so then the cupbearer is going to be returned to his service. And Joseph said, by the way, why don't you mention this to Pharaoh? Let him know that I could do this, that I did this for you. Well, I don't know why it doesn't say, but he didn't do it for 2 full years. After the time of his release from prison, 2 full years passes, and then Pharaoh has a dream. He's got a dream about plentiful things and lean things, cows and corn that are plenteous and that are lean. And so it really disturbs him. What can this mean? And so then the cupbearer says, well, there was a guy in prison who foretold all of my dreams. They came true. So Joseph impresses Pharaoh by interpreting his dream that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And so he is elevated to vizier, our prime minister, our chief advisor to the Pharaoh. So that's the biblical story. We're going to be talking about events from this and seeing how they coincide with things in Egyptian history. That's what we're going to do today. So scholars have long been searching for a specific Egyptian dynasty matching these events. A dynasty is a single family of successive kings who rule over whatever. In this case, it's Egypt. Rule over Egypt. And when a new family of kings succeeds the old family of kings, then a new dynasty begins. And Egyptian history amassed 26 dynasties over a period from 2925 BC, 2925 BC to 525 BC, whenever the Persian king Cambyses came in and overthrew Egypt and ended their reign of dominance that they'd had for a long, long time. So that's what we mean by dynasty. That's what they're looking for. So clues from the 12th dynasty of Egyptian history sound a bit like the biblical story of Joseph. All right, so a scholar named Donovan Corville, in his book, The Exodus Problem and Its Ramifications, noted 12th century inscriptions that spoke of years of famine in the 12th dynasty and of a canal which was built about that same time. Another scholar by the name of Charles Ayling, in his book, Egypt and Bible History, noted a papyrus of the 12th dynasty that described a great host of slaves in Egypt, including Canaanites who were purchased by private Egyptians. Some of these slaves held domestic posts of responsibility. It also describes prison conditions and executions during those days that match up with the way the Bible describes them. The culture and the climate of the 12th dynasty are harmonious with Joseph's story. So let's go into Egyptian history for a second here, and let's look at the circumstances surrounding the reign of Amenemhet the First. So if I do this and it doesn't change, wave at me, because I'm getting tired of looking around every time to make sure, okay? But it's working, Troy, we trust you. But if it doesn't change, say, hey, like that. So let's give this a trial. Amenemhet the First was the founder of the 12th Egyptian dynasty. Oh, well, I like looking at them. They're pretty. Okay. He formerly served as the vizier of the last pharaoh of the 11th dynasty, Amenemhet the First. And so he was the vizier. He was the chief guy next to the pharaoh. He was his advisor, and he led the Egyptian army in a campaign to oust foreigners that had come into the land. And he became so popular by doing that he just returned after the victory and he just usurped the throne. And so that ended the 11th dynasty. Amenemhet the First ended the 11th dynasty and started the 12th dynasty. And so there was a letter from Amenemhet to his son Sesostris that sets up the scenario which allows for the inclusion of the Bible account. Amenemhet, his son Sesostris, Amenemhet sends a letter to his son who is absent doing some other kind of work for the throne. And here's what the letter says. Okay, you ready? He says, beware of subjects who are nobodies, of whose plotting one is not aware. Trust not a brother, know not a friend, make no intimates. It's worthless. I gave to the beggar, I raised the orphan, I gave success to the poor as well as to the wealthy. I was a good guy. I was helpful to everybody. But he who ate my food raised opposition. He whom I gave my trust used it to plot. Wearers of my fine linen looked at me as if they were needy. It was after supper. Night had come. As my heart began to follow sleep, weapons for my protection were turned against me, while I was like a snake of the desert. I woke at the fighting, alert, and found it was a combat of the guard. The guard. Thus bloodshed occurred while I was without you. before the courtiers, the people of the court, had heard that I would hand over to you the kingdom, before I had sat with you as to advise you. For I had not prepared for it, had not expected it, had not foreseen the failing of the servants. Boy, what an interesting thing that happened to Amenemhet I. This letter describes an assassination attempt against him. And note the details of the letter. The attempted coup came from those within his own court. Those he trusted, he said. Those who wore his fine linen and ate his food. Close associates with him. His own bodyguard turned their weapons against him. It seemed that there were some of the bodyguard, the Secret Service as it were, who were loyal to the king and some who were in favor of the rebellion, and they fought against each other. So he said that his own servants had failed him, and he hadn't expected it. He hadn't seen it coming, didn't expect this thing. Egyptian history records that Amenemhet was severely wounded in this attack. And though he lived on for 10 more years, he was never the sole ruler of Egypt again. He shared a co-regency beginning at this point with his son Sesostris. Himself, Amenemhet, being too weak and sick to be able to handle it on his own. So Sesostris kind of takes over at this point. And Sesostris heeded his father's advice and took a long time in replacing a vizier or an advisor for himself. His father says, don't trust anybody, especially your friends and people you know. So this event in the reign of Amenemhet I has curious associations with Joseph's story. Let's look at a few of these. 2 close personal servants of Pharaoh were imprisoned with Joseph. 2 close personal servants. Why? Why were they imprisoned? It says in Genesis 40, verse 2, that Pharaoh was furious with his 2 officials. He put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. End of quote. Why? Could it be for failing to warn Pharaoh that there was a coup that was coming upon him, or perhaps even participating in the coup against the Pharaoh? I don't know. The Bible doesn't say why. It just says that Pharaoh was furious with them and put them into prison. Potiphar was described as the captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard, Genesis 39:1. Amenemhet, in Egyptian history, had weapons for his own protection were turned against him. It was his bodyguards that turned against him, and it was a combat of the guard, it said. Potiphar doesn't show back up in the story. Not even whenever Joseph is elevated. You don't hear of Potiphar raising any objections that, well, you shouldn't trust that guy or anything. What happened to Potiphar? Well, I don't know. We'll just leave it to say that there is a curious association there. There was no vizier when Joseph, an outsider, a foreigner, a total stranger, is appointed to be vizier. Genesis 41, verse 1, it says that Joseph appeared before Pharaoh 2 full years after the butler was released from prison and returned to his duties. So there's this attempted coup. 2 full years happen, and then one day the butler, the cupbearer, says, "Oh, I remember this guy," and he is brought in. So remember that Amenemhet warned his son against trusting anybody that he knows. Don't trust the people that are close to you. He said, "He whom I gave my trust used it to plot against me." All right? Now, the vizier, according to Egyptian history and culture, the vizier was the closest friend and advisor of the Pharaoh. That's the way the culture and the climate, the political climate was. Well, look with me. I'm going to make you get your Bible out or your phone and turn quickly over to Genesis chapter 41. I think it's important for us to just go ahead and just read a section here so that we see several events that happen the way the Bible describes it, and then look at the connection with the historical events around Sesostris I. All right, Genesis 41, verse 38. We're talking about the vizier being the closest friend and advisor to the king. Verse 38, Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and so wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh took off his signet ring from off his hand, and he put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put the gold necklace around his neck. And he had him ride in his second chariot. They proclaimed before him, "Bow the knee." And he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over all the land of Egypt. All right, the closest friend and advisor. That sounds like what Joseph was given. It's likely that Amenemhet's vizier was also a part of the coup, just like he had been with the Pharaoh before him. Egyptian history records the name of Kintibau as the vizier of Amenemhet I. Yet Kintibau is not buried in the area of Amenemhet's pyramid where his other high-ranking officials are buried. Amenemhet's chancellor, a lesser office, is buried in the large room which is usually reserved for the vizier. All of this implies that Kintibau died in dishonor. If he was involved in the coup attempt, it's no wonder that the office of vizier was left unfilled and open for 2 years, waiting for the right guy to come along, you see. Pharaoh, he was impressed with Joseph's ability to see the future and his skill at discernment. From the Bible story, Genesis 41, verse 39. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house." Seems like these traits would appeal to a ruler who was surrounded by so many unscrupulous characters of his own people that he didn't trust, whose father had been surprised. He wasn't prepared for the coup. He didn't expect an attack. Whose father's servants had failed him. Boy, wouldn't it be handy to have a guy who can see the future and have a discerning spirit to be able to know what other guys are thinking and doing. All right, so you look at all this stuff. These possible associations between biblical and secular history may seem flimsy to you. You may be going, okay, I can kind of see that, all right. But I want you to consider this. We are in lesson 3 of a 9-lesson series. We got a long ways to go. And synchronisms like these continue on for 200 more years, all the way through the end to the end of the 12th dynasty, which ends with Amenemhet IV in total ruin, a total disaster. The country is left completely decimated at the end of the fourth Amenemhet IV. Ted Stewart goes on to show 430 historical synchronisms between the biblical story and the history of Egypt. So we just have to decide, we have to ask ourselves, is it possible that this dynasty is holding within it the story, the biblical story of Joseph? So let's go ahead and let's ask a question now about this vizier that was ultimately assigned by Sesostris the First. There is a monument in Cairo. It wasn't originally in Cairo. It was discovered and it was brought to Cairo like a lot of artifacts for museums and stuff like that. But it records the commission of Sesostris I to his vizier. It's a monument. And so he gave what the orders and the official capacity of his vizier was, and he wanted everybody to know it. They chiseled it into stone and put it out there as a monument so everybody could know this guy has the king's authority to do all the stuff he's doing. Now we're talking about the historical vizier of Sesostris I. The monument notes that this commission came in the 3rd year of Sesostris' regency. His father has an assassination attempt against him. How long passes? 2 full years passes, according to Egyptian history. And then, after 2 full years, he appoints this vizier that we're reading about in history here. So, let's note some of the details up here. Number 1, he was called the royal seal bearer, the king's seal, his signet that he could put, his signet ring. What does it say in Genesis 41, verse 42? What did Pharaoh give to Joseph in the biblical story? He gave him his signet ring. So Joseph also was the royal seal bearer, as was this vizier of Sesostris I. It says he is called the sole companion and privy counselor. That synchronizes with the biblical description of Joseph that we read a few minutes ago. It says he is the overseer of the 2 gold houses and the 2 silver houses. Well, what does that mean? James Breasted, in his book History of Egypt, explains these terms. He says, the central office of the treasury, that is in Egypt now, he's not talking about the Bible story, he's talking about historical Egypt. The central office of the treasury was still the White House. Isn't that interesting? Which, through its sub-departments of the granary, the herds, the double gold house, the double silver house, and other produce of the country, were collected into the central magazines and stockyards, the annual revenues due to the Pharaoh. So the vizier of Sesostris I was in charge of the total treasury of the nation. Everything. He was in charge of all of it, including the money, the 2 gold houses, the 2 silver houses. In Genesis 47 and verse 14, it says, Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. But who was in charge of Pharaoh's house and in charge of Pharaoh's, all of his business? Well, of course, Joseph was. The responsibility that was afforded to Joseph in the biblical story synchronizes with the responsibility given to the vizier of Sesostris I. Okay, another thing is he was told to order the workmen. Put that on here. There we go. Order the workmen to do according to your design. And in Genesis 41, verses 44 all the way to 55, Joseph was in charge of everything. And the workmen did what he said, just as it was with the vizier of Sesostris I. Joseph's position, not only does it match up with the vizier of the 12th dynasty, Sesostris I, not only does it line up with that, but it only lines up. It fits only with the first unnamed vizier of Sesostris I. This vizier in Egyptian history is never named. His name is never given anywhere. Even though there's lots of stuff about him, it tells all the things he was doing, projects he was working on, as it related back to Sesostris, but it doesn't give his name. It says that the vizier in history, the vizier of Sesostris I, traveled over the whole country, overseeing things. This is, found in the historical documents. This is the same with Joseph in Genesis 41, verse 46, and several other places. It said he had rule over all the land, and he went and did projects regarding the preparation for the famine and then the distribution after the famine, as well as construction projects. Joseph did these things. But the viziers of Sesostris III, through the remainder of the 12th dynasty, were centralized in the capital. They didn't travel. They just supervised other officials over southern, middle, and northern Egypt. Only the vizier of Sesostris I traveled around the country doing projects. The 13th and 14th, that come up. The 13th and 14th dynasties existed simultaneously after the fall of the 12th dynasty. Thus, the rule of the entire land was split between two pharaohs, not like the situation in the 12th dynasty. The 15th through the 17th dynasties were all controlled by Hyksos rulers who had come in and overtaken the land, and they were appointing pharaohs. They would appoint 3 or 4 pharaohs at a time, and these pharaohs would govern 3 or 4 different areas at a time. It was nothing like what was described in the 12th dynasty under Sesostris I. Each of the 18th dynasty pharaohs appointed 2 viziers, one for northern Egypt and one for southern Egypt. That was nothing like it. There's only one place where the story coincides so closely with the biblical story. Other details of Joseph's life fit with the reign of Sesostris I. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 45, Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, to be his wife. Okay, what about this name? The name Zaphanath-Paneah. Of course, this comes across in Egyptian hieroglyphics to us. We translate those syllables of hieroglyphic hieroglyphic symbols. And so they translate those things, and the syllables of Zaphanath-Paneah, those same hieroglyphic symbols, are frequently found in the 12th dynasty. The translation of those syllables is the dignified seer of mysteries. His name was Asenath. His wife's name was Asenath. This was a popular name for women during the Middle Kingdom, which included the 12th dynasty. It would not be out of line. The Bible says her name was Athanath, and Egyptian history says, yes, that name was often used. So it's not like the Bible saying something that wasn't historically true there. His father, Potipharah, was the priest of On. Okay, On is the biblical word. the Greek word in the Septuagint, in the Greek Septuagint, it doesn't have on. It's translated Heliopolis. Okay, so Heliopolis is the same as On, the city of On. It means Sun City. I'd like to go there. As the next month comes along, I want to go to Heliopolis and get a tan. So Sun City is what it was called. Not Sin City, that's Las Vegas. Now, this was Sun City. It was the place where the sun god Ra was worshipped. It's the place where the temple to Ra was, and the priests of Ra were at Heliopolis. So, the name Potiphar, that's why I've been saying it funny. Potiphar means he whom Ra has given. It's associated with the sun god Ra. Potiphar, I can't even say that old way anymore. Potiphar, that doesn't sound right. Potiphar, that sounds better. He was obviously a priest of the sun god in Heliopolis, according to the biblical story. He was obviously the priest of the sun god in Heliopolis. Well, during the 3rd year of the reign of Sesostris, the 3rd year, after 1 full year, after 2 full years, in his 3rd year, Sesostris commanded his vizier to build a tall pillar and a lake before the temple of Ra at Heliopolis. In the 3rd year of his reign, he now has a vizier, and he sends him on a construction project to oversee the construction in Heliopolis of this tall pillar and a lake. At the completion of the construction, Sesostris joined his vizier at Heliopolis, and he made a speech at the dedication ceremony, a portion of the speech we have that we can refer to. Thus, we have historical evidence that the vizier of Sesostris I spent considerable time in the very location where the Bible says that Joseph's wife and his father-in-law lived and worked. The Bible says this was happening at On, or Heliopolis, and the Egyptian history says the vizier of Sesostris I was at Heliopolis working on a construction project. Joseph's new name, his wife's name, his father-in-law's position is there described, all of them described in the Bible, fit perfectly into the religious, political, cultural, historical, and geographical background of the vizier of Sesostris I. Both of them coincide at this one place at the same point of time, described in the Bible after 2 full years in the 3rd full year of Sesostris I. All right, one more thing. One more thing is in Genesis 41, verse 50. It says, before the years of famine came, the Bible, this is the Bible talking now, before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar. You don't like that, do you? Potiphar, the priest of On. Okay. The Bible is saying that before the years of famine came, Joseph had 2 sons. Since this vizier of Sesostris I began construction in Heliopolis in the 3rd year of Sesostris' reign, this allowed 5 years before the 7 years of plenty ended. There would have been 1 year after the assassination attempt, 1 year, another year, and then in the 3rd year, this project in Heliopolis, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7 more years, that's 5 more years before the years of plenty ended. 5 years would be ample time for their first 2 sons to be born before the years of famine began. So, the Bible says that before the years of famine came, he had 2 sons. History shows that in the 3rd year, his vizier was there at Heliopolis. If he married Asenath, they would have had 5 years to have 2 sons before the years of famine. Another coincidence. You say coincidence, that makes it sound like, no, it could have happened, you know. But the point is that these 2 things coincide. Once again, the events of the story of Joseph synchronize perfectly with the timetable of years 2 through 8 of the reign of Sesostris I. I know you're longing for more. I can see by the look in your eyes, you're just going, tell us something else that gives us goosebumps. You know. But that's all for today, and I feel very fortunate that I was able to get through all that. 3.5 pages of notes. So I was going pretty fast, tried to show it and explain it so you could see it, but there are notes. Okay, so you can get the complete notes, and you can get the handout that has that letter and has what was on that monument. You can go home, you can pore over this and think about it some more yourself. If you would like to check out the video that's not covering this same thing, but it is coming to the same conclusion in kind of a different way about Egyptian timetable and history, you can check out the video. Just use the pen that's there, put your name down and the date that you've checked it out, and take the thing with you if you still have any kind of device that plays a DVD. Believe me, young people don't. They go, DVD? Oh yeah, I've heard of those. Can I stream it? Maybe. All right, any thoughts or questions before we dismiss today? Are y'all with me? You ready to see what happens next as we go on through all the 12th dynasty? It's really